Cypress Development Corp. is developing a world-class lithium resource in the heart of Clayton Valley, Nevada. The size of the resource makes the Clayton Valley project a premier asset with the potential to impact the future of lithium supply. Cypress Development Corp. trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol CYP, the OTCQB, symbol CYDVF, and on Frankfurt, symbol C1Z1. For more information, please visit our website, cypressdevelopmentcorp.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. His website, resourceworks.com. You can also find him on Twitter at SJMuir. Welcome back to the show.
Why, thank you, Jim.
Stewart, you sent me some interesting headlines. The first one, 10 ways to improve unity and prosperity in turbulent times. Well, what are some of the 10 ways we can do things better together?
Well, you know, I thought at first there were 6 ways, and then I realized there were 10. No, but seriously, I sat down the other day because, you know, we're looking at the headlines. Every day seems to be a new, unexpected twist and turn in the economic recovery or the economic crisis being prolonged. A lot of uncertainty in the world. There's, of course, the news from the stock market in the last few days has been excellent, although somewhat mysterious. I mean, I'm sure we could have a great chinwag about the different theories that have been advanced as to why we have this seeming disconnect between the share markets and what appears to be happening in the world of employment and, you know, the loss of retail business and all that kind of thing. It's just a weird disconnect. So you might say good news for those who are mostly invested in the stock market. Not so good news for anyone who's running a small business that relies on interacting with the public in a traditional way. And so we are seeing a lot of, I think, mixed messages from political leadership, and this is where a lot of my focus is. You know, especially provincial governments in Canada, British Columbia, Alberta, I look at a little more closely because I'm here in the West, as your listeners are, and it's not detached from what's happening out in Ontario, Quebec, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, other provinces. So I think we've got to be tuned into that. Also looking at the international scene, it's too obvious to state that Trump's providing more interest than we maybe really need right now, but that's part of the mix. And then on top of it all, you've got the uncertainty that comes from the China relationship. You know, living in Victoria, I feel blessed to be able to look upon the maritime traffic that passes down the Haro Strait out Juan de Fuca, the Strait of Juan de Fuca, towards the markets in Asia. It's a tremendous trade, whether it's the coal ships, the oil tankers, the break bulk and container ships. I mean, it's a robust trade, and all of it is about Asia. Yet we're feeling the political pressure to question the relationship with China, which is a healthy thing to be questioning. However, we have developed obviously a tremendous reliance on our trade in the East Asian countries. So, you know, this is the mood we're in. There's all of these factors. And so through this, I've been trying to set a course to understand from a perspective of being a country that's reliant largely on its ability to develop export commodities safely and beneficially, and then get the goods, natural resource products, metals, ores, minerals, fibers from forest products, and, you know, paper, lumber. LNG is coming. Obviously, oil, crude oil, our biggest single earner of any category of anything we export. You know, trying to put together and find the zen in all this. So that's what I've been working on the last few days. I published an article a few days ago that wrapped it up into 10 ways to improve unity and prosperity in turbulent times. It comes out of my thinking here. You know, this one I thought I'd just put it out there, and I found that a lot of people wanted to talk about it. It generated so much interest. I thought that we should maybe focus on that today.
So should we start off with number 10 and work our way to number 1?
Oh boy, you're such a contrarian. Okay, I'll go along with that, Jim. Let's do that.
Well, yeah, we want people to stay on the edge of their seats wondering what's number
that's
one.
Fair. Yeah, and by the way, if anyone wants to see this from themselves, they just go to resourceworks.com. There's a heading there, News and Reports. It's one of the most recent ones at the top of the list of the news items that we published. Easy to find. But number 10, starting from the bottom, is here's what I'm saying. Let's measure what's being done to green up our economy and then do more of the things that are working and less of the things that aren't working.
Okay, number 9?
Now,
or maybe explain what number 10 was.
All right. Yeah. Here's what I mean by that. The first thing that comes to mind when we look at what's working is let's link efficiency with emissions reductions that ensure that right now we are seeing a lot of people in Canada experiencing these decarbonization measures as a negative. They feel it as a threat. Now, maybe they should just, loosen up and get with it, but I think we could see governments do a lot more to bring this as an opportunity to people rather than as a threat to their way of life, a threat to their businesses, rather than this sense that, they're being punished for doing things the way we've always done them. And instead, let's move way more emphasis onto specifically efficiency. Let's make it a positive to drive to greater efficiency. Let's see some rewards for driving cars and trucks that use fuels, more thriftily and more efficiently, higher horsepower from less inputs. I mean, technology lets us do this, and so do lighter materials used in manufacturing of automobiles. This is a technology driver, an innovation source, and also something that if we manage it well, it can keep manufacturing activities in Canada. I think what's happened in our culture right now is the polarization that we see. We've got on one side, you can't have oil exports, you can't have LNG, you can't do this, can't do that. And then you got people on the other side saying, wait a minute, we need to do those things. It's how we earn our living. How can you take that away from us? So I think finding that middle ground where there's less of that blunt instrument of the project opposition movements. We saw the use of economic terrorism earlier this year to bring governments to the table. I mean, the shocking thing there is it actually works incredibly well. If you look at what happened specifically with the Wet'suwet'en negotiations, the unfortunate fact is that a significant, if not a majority, of the Wet'suwet'en people have actually been left out because economic terrorism was used as an instrument to force governments for the sake of, I guess their thinking must have been, we don't really know because they haven't told us, but in order to get the railroads running again back in March, they agreed to some concessions that have created disadvantages for a significant number of Indigenous people as well as great unknowns for others. And so this is really a result of not being able to have the honest discussions and the transparent discussions. Let's share the information. Governments have been incredibly tight-lipped. Industry is not perfect either. I mean, it has been looking for ways to engage better. So I think what we need is let's find the common interest that can be undertaken that benefit everybody. Get away from untested measures that seek to just fix things with a magic switch being thrown. It doesn't really work that way. Never has. And then drive towards something in common. That's number 10. Here's number 9. The next one up the list is ensure all future moves toward greater prosperity include the Indigenous peoples of Canada. And whether this is by pursuing goals like 5% of federal government procurement through Indigenous companies, that's an actual campaign being undertaken by the Canadian Coalition of Aboriginal Businesses. They think that would be a fair way to get towards a catch-up for Indigenous companies. Whether it's making sure that clean water is on reserves, that's been a huge problem that no one has solved. It should be solvable by efforts that we can make. So let's get on top of that one. And then ensuring that the governance systems of communities are stronger, because I think that's one of the failures we've seen in the case, once again, of the Wet'suwet'en, where for a whole bunch of complicated reasons, it's been difficult to get people together in ways to work productively together. Now, number 8 is geopolitics matters. Those are the two words, and I referenced that earlier, Jim. I mean, let's look at China. Look, waves of trade missions to China that Canada has made. Jim, do you remember Team Canada? Not hockey, but trade?
I don't know. A lot of people were complaining too much concentration on the left wings. But
yes. Well, the other Team Canada, for years, this was, not so much in recent years. There's less talk about this. I don't know why. There should be more. We had these trade missions. It was a big story when 100 business leaders would get together with politicians and bureaucrats and others, and they would troop off to Japan or China or Korea, and they would sign some trade agreements, and it was a big thing. That trend seems to have passed, and yet it was a very effective one in focusing the interest of industry and actually using the influence of government to open the doors that wouldn't easily open or open at all otherwise. That seems to have fallen out of fashion because of the complexities with China right now and the Huawei problem, the Canadian political prisoners being held, other frictions. I mean, if the U.S. is now in its twilight era as a global superpower, which is a chilling thought, and China is on the ascendancy, here's a non-democratic country that has got territorial ambitions it speaks of quite freely. We know what they want to do because they tell us. They want to have the Belt and Road stretching all across Eurasia to bring the Chinese trade supremacy to that area. That's something that's rational for China to want to do, but it brings all kinds of risks geopolitically. If you look at all of the trade all of the trade goods that Canada produces, the day is coming when we will be not just a relatively minor player in global trade, but we'll be a true minnow if we don't engage in that trade. If we sort of deal ourselves out, as we are threatening to do now, or because of internal forces, we are putting ourselves on the bench, we will never get back in the game. And that's the element of geopolitics here. But another thread is Russia. You look at what Russia's doing. As the world is occupied with pandemic, as the U.S. Election year story becomes what we're all talking about until November or beyond, very quietly, Russia is out there massively building up its oil and gas infrastructure. They're investing in pipelines to China. They're investing in pursuing the opportunities for LNG export that Canada has fumbled. We've got so much potential, and only a small part of it is on track, and we've yet to realize any of it in full. Here's Russia taking advantage of all of the things that we have been so slow to, because we cannot get decisions made, we cannot get things built quickly, we can't get our goods to market. So, at the end of the day, Canada will be a net loser, and the world will be no better off. Those who are in Canada protesting that we do these things, it's not going to do anything positive for global climate. If Canada, with the transparent regulations we've got, the ability to oblige industry to do the best it can in its environmental protections, in its climate policies, if we just simply rule ourselves out, do you think Russia is going to become that leader in climate? It's delusional to think so, of course. So that's the third factor. Moving up the list, backwards up our list to number 7. The fourth one is that win-win solutions aren't easy. I mean, that sounds pretty banal, but let me say it this way. Affordability, accessibility, reliability aren't the factors that the public's talking about right now when it comes to the new ideas for energy that are so sexy. Everyone wants to talk about these solutions that are exciting. They send a chill up the spine when people hear about solar. Sounds wonderful, but is it affordable? Is it going to be accessible and practical to people who live in all parts of the country, no matter what the sunshine is? Are they reliable? These are questions that I think get lost to the hype. So we've got to keep an eye on that. Next one is spreading the word about the endless possibilities of energy, because we are the energy civilization more than any time in human history, in the sense that we have exponentially expanded our ability to make energy available for human endeavor, and then we found ways to use that energy and more energy. I mean, our appetite for energy is essentially insatiable. We continue to need more and more of it. So while this is happening, how are we getting better at realizing the possibilities for making sure that energy use is responsible and sustainable over the long term? You know, in the last week, we've heard the news out of Alberta. They've finished off the Sturgeon refinery. That's a $10 billion green refinery. It's using oil sands product to make diesel, lower emissions diesel. They've also, and this is the recent news, they've finished off the carbon trunk line, which is going to be used to capture carbon from refining carbon dioxide and use it to stimulate wells in Leduc, and the birthplace of the Canadian oil and gas industry in the post-Second World War era. They're actually getting new life out of those wells because of it, and preserving that carbon so it doesn't go into the atmosphere. A win-win. You know, LNG here in BC, it's on track to reduce global emissions, and now they're pushing more to electrify the projects they do, so they're even lower in GHGs. Last week, here's some other news that happened. We had a new Bank of Canada governor, Tiff Macklem, came in, and his first day on the job was last week. Last summer, ResourceWorks went to a meeting in Vancouver with Tiff, and we heard about the potential he was talking about to electrify the oil sands, and in doing that, capture huge emissions reductions and green up our oil sands that we need in the economy. I'm really happy we've got a Bank of Canada governor who's talking about this stuff, and I hope he continues to do so now that he's in the job. Look, Jim, here's the next one. Win for Canada, a reasonable share of the $1.5 trillion in private equity that is right now poised for investment decisions globally. That's how much money is out there looking for places to invest. And you know what? It's not that easy. I mean, anyone who's looking for things to invest in, whether you're looking for an ETF or looking to buy a home or a small business or large business, you know it's not easy to find that property that, you know, fits your budget, fits your life plan. Same's true of large-scale industrial investments. It's not easy. Canada has got the potential to be an absolute, first-class investment destination, no matter where in the world that capital is coming from. And, you know, often you do hear, oh, foreign investment, we don't want that foreign dabbling in our economy. We want to have an all-Canadian economy. Well, that's not how Canada had ever worked. You know, whether it was the transcontinental railroads, where the money in the 19th century came from, you know, widows' funds in Great Britain, or all these. It's the same now. You know, it might be the firefighters' pension fund of Pittsburgh that is looking to invest in the Trans Mountain Pipeline. I mean, it comes down to things like this, where you've got money that comes in from foreign countries because they see a reliable, stable country where conditions exist for good dividend-producing investments to come about. And frankly, we've, in the last few years, been better at chasing away the investment capital than drawing it. And we've got to get better at that. And so, you know, we need to look at combining our real existing strengths, find out where the gaps are. You know, if there's something we're not doing well enough, we've got to get past that so we can exert a more magnetic pull on the investment. Here's the next one on my list. It's do more of what we're best at.
Is that number 4?
That's number 4.
Okay.
And that's moving up to number 4. So, number 7, really, as we go through, just to confuse things. But look, you know, thinking back again to the new Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklem, last summer when we met Mr. Macklem, heard him in context, he was advising Canadians at that time to be proactive in aligning to the ESG standards. I'll tell you what that is in a minute. Some of your listeners will know. And effectively communicating the results of this alignment with the goal of making Canadian resource products the global choice. What is ESG? Well, ESG is the initials of a widely used term in the world of finance, and it stands for environment, society, and governance. These are the three pillars of how investors, especially in Europe, where they're very particular about those qualities for making investments. And there are standards being developed to measure ESG so that you can apply it equally in making an investment decision anywhere in the world. And I think there's going to be a lot more work done. I've helped a graduate student at the University of Calgary School of Public Policy recently in developing some understanding about ESG and what it means for Canadian energy. We've got some really bright minds applying themselves. But back to Tiff Macklin's idea, we need to address ourselves. So if you're talking about mining investments, whether you're talking about junior mining opportunities or you're thinking about oil and gas in Canada, you've got to be thinking about ESG if you want to be on the cutting edge. And so this is something we already do best at. If you look at ESG, what does it really mean? Well, environment, that's pretty clear what that means. Society is a bigger, broader, almost a vague term. What does it mean? Well, equitable distribution of the benefits of our industries through the economy is kind of an obvious read on it. When it comes to governance, I think values like transparency and the willingness to accept that change is needed and navigating through that change successfully. And I'm talking about, specifics. We're going to see European investors who control a lot of things, including things like insurance, and have a vast pool of capital. They'll be saying, are you embracing global carbon pricing movements? Are you a leader in that? If so, how? And is it actually making a difference? Are you effective in implementing it? On the other side of that right now, we've seen in the recovery period a lot of decline in investment. So you talk about transparency and governance on achieving these economic goals, but if you're doing things that inhibit competitiveness, maybe it's carbon leakage. There's a term which means that if you make it too hard for people to do a certain activity here in Canada because you will tax their emissions at a high rate, and they're just going to go to Washington State and make cement there and create emissions and no one cares, and then they're going to sell that cement back to us in Canada so someone can build a condominium in Coquitlam using that that cement that is not facing a carbon price, that is inhibiting jobs and investment in Canada. And that's actually a specific example of how this is working. That's not a successful policy, and we have to have a better policy. And I think being part of an ESG leading country, we have to be honest about these things. We also need to make sure we are allowing mechanisms for compliance, for carbon offsetting, also with LNG to recognize, and it's been very difficult for some people who are advocating things to government to accept and be honest about this, but the fact that LNG represents the largest opportunity in Canada to drive economic development at the same time as displacing higher GHG intensive sources of energy globally. And there's a few reasons for that. One of them is that we have electric drive for some of the LNG proposals, wood fiber. There's new talk of an electric transmission line going from Prince George to Kitimat that would make more green energy available for LNG development. That's a good thing. So that's how we hammer down the emissions profile of important industries. So being honest about that, I think is essential. Moving on
so
to my next
Stewart,
item.
Stewart will do the top three right after the break.
Okay, Jim.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon, trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, we're into the top 3 of the 10 ways to improve unity and prosperity in turbulent times. Number 3.
Number 3, diversify in fresh ways. Let me get into what that means. Often we seem to lately be hearing that we need a revolution for everything. Whether it's policing, defund the police, whatever that means. I don't think anyone's really sure. In reality, change is likelier to be about evolution. And if we focus on the revolutionary approach to things, those who are thirsting for rapid change tend to overlook how very quietly, and I'm talking here about industry, it's the traditional industries we have that are the ones driving new solutions in an evolutionary way. And I've got a great example of that I've been thinking about on how some of these big long-term changes in how things are done in a cleaner way are coming from incumbent industrial players and not from another clean tech guru who is promising big but not necessarily delivering anything. I'm thinking about statements made by the CEO Mark Little of Suncor, the major vertically integrated oil and gas company from Alberta, on the need to diversify into hydrogen, renewable jet fuel, carbon fiber. I mean, this is a part of the picture. They're still very much a traditional business, but like all of these big companies that are, in our FP top 100 companies, they are looking at ways to have a long-term runway for innovation in their companies that will allow them to be part of any kind of changes that come in our energy systems. Hydrogen is an example. A lot of people are excited by this. I'm going to be speaking with the mayor of Sturgeon County, which is outside of Edmonton. It's in that industrial complex. It's actually where they have the Sturgeon refinery. They are so excited there about the carbon capture and the hydrogen economy that is made possible by the fact that we have the oil and gas reserves that we do have here in Canada. Jet fuel, as we see travel returning, there's going to be demand for the type of jet fuel that allows us to expand travel. You look before the pandemic crisis, we know that the people at YVR were looking at expansion plans to accommodate the enormous increase in predicted global aviation travel coming in future years and decades. To do that sustainably over the long term, of course we want to be looking at jet fuel. So Canada's got all kinds of opportunities to be a player in that space. And they can actually multiply the scale of Canadian resource production without increasing our greenhouse emissions. So this is a big thing. Moving up my list, I think we should be applying the Canadian brand to the growth opportunities we have. Emphasize our strengths and our prioritization of national needs. And this is almost a signature move for Canada that we do anyways, but I don't think we're that good. We're sort of shy as a nation. That's kind of our character. We're not the braggarts out there. But we do excel.
And if we are successful, we'll say we're sorry for it.
We're sorry, very sorry to be so successful. That's right. Let's, rather than give up after years of frustration that we've had, especially out west here, it's time to become more creative. Let's double down on the creativity. Let's get better at telling the story of Canadian success. You and I are communicators. We are always thinking, I guess I can't speak for you, but I think it's true of you, Jim. I think we're always looking for ways to get better at telling stories and getting to the facts. And I'm always thinking about this when it comes to the Canadian industry story, success story, and also helping millennials. I don't want to pick on millennials. It's too easy. They're just young people trying to find their way in the world, and we got to help them and see the possibilities for innovation, for growth, for change, the stuff that they as a group we say they want. I mean, I guess we should ask them individually to make sure that's true. I think it is, and then not let the limitations and imperfections that we have today in things. I mean, it's not a perfect world. Not let that cancel out the incredible possibilities of the future. So, if we throw out the things we're doing, maybe not perfectly, but improvingly, then we won't be able to get to the future possibilities, and that's a problem. It could become a problem. And the final thing on my list is that we articulate a future. And when I say we, especially I mean people who work in industry, whether it's in finance or the engineering side of operations, be sure we're articulating a future that shows an understanding of society's expectations. Because it's back to the culture wars. If the perspective is, oh, that's not legit, and maybe people have an unreal expectation of things, so we're going to fight them. Well, I don't think we have time for that, and it's not really that productive anyway. So, we are constantly dealing with this message that there's an urgent need to transition away from extractive forms of sourcing the things we need for our physical inputs in life to make the stuff we use, the stuff we need, only to discover that the solutions available to make that transition require more work than anyone expected. Look at Ontario with their green plan. Currently, ratepayers in the province are saddled with a $21 billion debt to basically pay for some mistakes that were made in estimating the degree to which renewable energy could be implemented into their provincial energy system. Fortunately, they have nuclear and gas to get them through this, but that was an incredible price to pay, and it's, I think, caused a retreat into oppositional camps. You see out of this conflicts and disappointments that don't get us any closer to this yearning for progress that is so human. And so a lot of people now, I find, and I encourage this, are talking about ways to escape from the positionalities. Is that a word? And the polarization. And I think that's a good thing if we can just try harder to do that, because if we don't, we're not going to be moving ahead at all.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlan, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, new figures have been released on how badly the economy's been affected by the virus crisis. What can we do about these bad things, and can you tell us about them?
Yeah, well, we're seeing the worst GDP shock since the 1930s. The decline in employment is a measure of that. Take a look in BC's case. We've seen a 36% decline over 2019 in upstream oil and gas capital investment. So it was last year it was $3.3 billion. And most of that would be going into drilling wells, building some of the localized pipeline infrastructure for the gas fields, the gas processing plants, the water management, that kind of stuff. This year, best estimate is $2.1 billion. That's an estimate that comes out of Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers recently. So a 36% decline. This has a direct effect on the manufacturers in the Lower Mainland who supply, whether it's trucking or tools, all sorts of goods and services required to keep the Northeast gas sector going. they're all going to be feeling that, and so will the workers in those fields who are well paid, and those are great jobs. They're not going to be working as much, so that will trickle through. We're also seeing a big decline federally. You know, we've got significant amount of recovery that needs to happen, and because we have LNG and because we have 2 pipelines being built, you know, we've got some good, stable stuff happening that will be multi-year in nature, and it's going to get us through. But it's when you see a capital investment decline like we're getting that you start to worry about the fallout from that over a long time. And let me connect the dots on it, because it's when you look at the economic output, once you've finished that work, once you've constructed those industrial facilities, not only have you got the benefit of that activity that's now in the economy, but you also have the activity that can happen in future using what's been built. And a great example here is the labor productivity figures. If you put it in terms of how much per hour worked by an individual worker is created, the number one source in our economy of GDP is from mining and oil and gas. So one worker produces $304 by working for 1 hour. And that would contrast, and I don't want to pick up others out and taunt them because they're smaller, but the fact is they are much less. Healthcare creates $45 of economic impact compared to $304 for mining and oil and gas. Arts, entertainment, recreation, we need more of that. Retail trade, similar figure, around $29 to $32 an hour for those fields. And again, I would only point out that this is because they are essentially working with the dollars that are already in the economy. They're trading those dollars that we already have. Whereas the export generating ones, and that includes forestry and aquaculture, you know, one beautiful Atlantic salmon pulled out of a salmon farm in BC is worth a barrel of oil, or maybe a couple of barrels of oil at the moment. That's a tremendous thing that you can then export and get dollars for. And that's what we do. So we need these things in the economy. Right now, we're hearing a whole bunch of propositions. Every day it seems like there's a new one for, you know, resilient recovery or green transition. And the basic idea is through the economic wreckage of the pandemic, Canada should transition away from these horrible things that have been terrible for Canada, like oil and gas and mining and forestry and aquaculture. Well, it's the opposite. I mean, this is the time when we should be doubling down on those opportunities because they are the ones that we control. They're here for us. We don't have control over tourism. You know, it's not up to us whether Chinese students return to Canadian universities bringing their high tuition payments with them. It's not up to us whether that happens quickly or at all. And yet we can make decisions about exporting things. We can build a pipeline. You know, we can, as a country, have an LNG plant and decide on mines, and then we can find the global markets for those things. So we should be doing more of these. But in light of those other comments, I had my 10 ideas on finding a better way to do things. You know, we really desperately need to find a way to make it, socially harmonious and a win-win approach, so that we're not turning everything into a culture war. I mean, that doesn't work. And by doing so, I think we can get out of the pandemic phase, at least in an economic sense, hopefully in a health sense too, pretty neatly and fairly quickly. But it will require deliberate effort. And right now, there are some signs that governments might not see how to do that. So I'm trying to help governments by bringing out information that will be relevant to this discussion.
Stewart, thank you so much for being on the show.
Okay. Thank you, Jim.
My guest has been Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. His website, resourceworks.com. Find him on Twitter at SJMuir. If you have any questions for Stewart or any of our other guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at HowStreet. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.